Olá, boa noite a todos e a todas. Eu sou Priscila Mottlover, diretora da SPE Brasil para Sustentabilidade e Diversificação Energética. Hello, everyone. I'm Priscila Mottlover with SPE Brasil. I'm the Secretary for Sustainability and Energy Transition. Vou fazer uma breve introdução aqui hoje ao nosso Tech Tuesday, falando primeiro um pouquinho sobre os nossos próximos eventos. First, I'll talk a little bit about our next event here in Brazil in Portuguese, if you don't mind, before we pass on to our Tech Tuesday talk today. Eu estou muito feliz hoje de fazer aqui a abertura desse evento, porque o tema hoje tem muito a ver com sustentabilidade. Mas a gente tem muita coisa programada aí esse ano de 2024, está prometendo, pessoal. Então, queremos aqui fazer uma chamada, um convite a todos vocês, anotem na agenda aí os próximos eventos. Dia 18 de maio, tem o Latin American and Caribbean Student Symposium, vai ser no Rio de Janeiro, vamos aproveitar, né? Vai ter aí o Paper Contest, o Petro Bowl, vai ter sessões, Career Fair, Exhibition, não percam, tá muito, muito bacana. Próximo. Também temos esse ano, né, completando 100 anos, a TCE, no SPE Internacional, vai ser aí de 23 a 25 de setembro, e já está com o Call for Papers, já está aberto, já podem mandar o seu abstract para os eventos, para os trabalhos que forem apresentados aí na TCE 2024, uma edição comemorativa de 100 anos. É muito bacana aí, então mandem seus trabalhos. E aqui no Brasil, teremos em breve o SPE Awards. Essa data teve que ser postergado por motivos diversos, né? Mas alguns premiados já estão sendo comunicados, né? Já temos algumas pessoas que foram comunicadas, outros nomes também a gente já vai comunicar em breve, e teremos uma cerimônia para reconhecer os profissionais de destaque na nossa área, né? Na indústria de óleo e gás, em várias categorias. Vai ser muito bacana. Teremos a SP Day, que é um evento de organização da SPE Brasil. E em 6 de abril, temos Petro Games. Em maio, como eu falei, né, o Petro Bowl e Paper Contest, no evento que eu acabei de falar. Próximo, por favor. Em maio, também teremos workshop de campos maduros offshore. Em junho, Decommissioning Symposium, também já começamos a organizar. Ano passado, esse evento foi um sucesso, né? Foram 3 dias. Esse ano, a gente está planejando um evento um pouco mais curto, de 1 dia e meio, também no Rio de Janeiro, mas também com muita coisa bacana que a gente está planejando para vocês. Em agosto, workshop de segurança operacional de poços. Em setembro, nós temos FPSO Symposium. Próximo. Em outubro, segurança operacional offshore. Novembro, 2 eventos, o Flow Assurance Technology Congress e o Subsea Symposium. Em dezembro, né, se tudo der certo, a gente faz o SPE Award de 2024, nova edição. Então, pessoal, muitos eventos, muitas oportunidades, né, para vocês estarem interagindo com a gente, participando dessa comunidade. Queria agradecer a todos por estarem assistindo. Vamos hoje, então, como eu falei, fazer o nosso Tech Tuesday. Vou passar a palavra para o Pierre, que também é diretor da SPE Brasil, para que ele possa introduzir o tema e também os palestrantes. Hi, Pierre.
Hello, Priscilla. The floor is mine. Fantastic. So thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the sharing a number of events happening in Brazil. And I'm very happy to have today the pleasure to introduce a special Tech Tuesday. We were looking for themes that would be out of the ordinary for some of us, at least it is for me. And we have the pleasure today to bring a topic which is related to social sciences and sustainability, a theme dear to your heart, Priscilla. So I'll do the quick introduction for our two main speakers and special guest today. There'll be a presentation by Ileana Ferber, and then after that there'll be a bit of a conversation, a panel discussion with Nicholas Abrahams and also Amanda Kortkamp with SPE, and then we'll take questions and answers from the audience and yourself and myself. So Ileana Ferber is currently CEO and founder of Colibri Business Development. She joined Mobile in Venezuela in 1998 and had a 24-year career before going independent. She spent most of her career in the global procurement department, gaining experience in negotiating and executing service contracts for upstream operations in all regions where ExxonMobil has a footprint. Ileana has a BA in languages, a business major from Universidad Metropolitana in Caracas, an MBA in international development from Thunderbird, and executive certification in economic development from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Her passion and purpose are to build government capability, create competitive supply market, and develop the skills of nationals, helping developing countries overcome poverty and social challenges. Ileana was born and raised in Venezuela, where she lived for 27 years before moving to the US in 2003. She currently lives in the Woodlands, Texas, with her husband, 2 daughters, and 2 dogs. I'll introduce Nick Abrahams because that's the right time to do that. So Nicholas Abrahams is a sustainability leader with over 20 years experience in managing ESG risks and sustainability outcomes with a specialization in social performance and human rights. Until recently, Nick was the director of social sustainability at SLB and part of the leadership team responsible for climate action strategy and systemic change in the social and environmental performance of the company. Nick served as the vice chair of the IPICA Social Responsibility Group and chair of the Human Rights Working Group, and is currently also a board member of the SPE Sustainable Development Technical Section, where we met. And then finally, Amanda Kortkamp is an active young member of SPE Brazil, currently vice president of the UFRJ student chapter. She also volunteered to help with developing international relations and currently holds the role of deputy. Ileana, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, my pleasure, again, being in the space of the Society of Petroleum Engineers. Even though I'm not an engineer, I have had the opportunity to collaborate several times with this organization, and the fact that they speak a lot in the topics of sustainability makes me really very excited to be a part of this organization and collaborate in topics like the one that we're going to cover today. So I'm going to kick off this Tech Tuesday talking about the social consequences of growth in nascent oil and gas industry. What happened when you have oil and gas and the countries, your nations experience rapid growth due to oil and gas. So I'm going to kick off with that. And let's see. First of all, I would like to set up the scene. Why? Because we're talking about in this audience, of course, we all know about the oil and gas, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we all understand what we're going to be talking about. And I'd like to set the scene by explaining what's really going to be when we're talking about the social aspects in this case. So we need to start by defining what are the social elements. In this case, I'm going to mention 2. First, the communities. So the communities is pretty much a group of peoples or individuals that share an identity, and that identity forms a narrative of where do they belong in terms of languages, the language that they speak, demographics, geography, traditions. And then we have the people or the individual. So it can be one person or the other that share the same place where they live or share the same interests. So in that specific area in common is what bring these 2 individuals together. So when we say we talk about the social aspect, then those are going to be the 2 elements: the communities and the people, the individual, you, me, your brother, your sister, your husband. And the community, when we talk about more, I mean, a group, the community of Venezuela, in the eastern part of Venezuela, the community of Nigeria, and the indigenous community of the First Nations. So, but then now we're going to be talking about also, when we mention about social impacts, what are we going to be referring to? The social impacts are actually going to be the effects that some actions or the lack of actions, projects, policies, activities, that effect that will have on the communities and the people. And those can be positive and negative. So when we are going to talk about the social impact of rapid growth in a nation oil and gas industry, we're going to be referring at those effects on the communities and the people. And you will see that what we're going to talk about is usually about oil and gas projects, and those have different stages and different phases. But we're not going to be talking about those specific stages. We're going to talk about what are those impacts. Oh, those are the arrows. So now let's address now what are the context of the social consequences, because we're going to be talking about the impacts of those the consequences of those impacts. Sorry. And you have the socioeconomic consequence, and I want to include the word economic because we live in a house, or we live in a community, in a city, or wherever we live. We need money to buy our groceries. We need money to pay a rent. We have to sell some goods, offer some services. So there's this exchange of money. So the economic part of everything, of the impacts or consequences, cannot be isolated. So that's what I like to talk about, socioeconomic aspects and the consequences of this rapid growth. And in these socioeconomic consequences, or we have, again, the individual, the family, just a person, or the whole community. And when you're talking about oil and gas projects, you pretty much impact both. When you're developing the facilities, when you are actually doing the seismic, even if you're doing seismic onshore or offshore, you are disturbing, or you're creating some impacts to the communities, to the fisheries, or to the people that live close to the cities, or the shore-based support. But also when you have activities that are in near a city or near a town, then when you build the roads to get to those facilities, or to build that facility, you're pretty much impacting the lives of towns. As simple as too many cars driving there, and you kind of create a lot of dust, or maybe an accident. Children cannot play any longer on the street because it's dangerous. Things like that. So all those aspects. And in the part of the socioeconomic, or the economic part, is what happened when a country, because of the resources, of natural resources, and it started getting a lot of influx of money. So this is going to be the context: the people, the communities, the socioeconomic aspects. And then we're not going to be talking about countries developed or industrialized countries like the Norway, or the US, or Canada, Australia. We're going to be talking about countries where there is a nation, a young or newborn oil and gas industry. And usually those discoveries are not really in industrialized nations. So that's where we're going to be addressing this topic today. And a key word here, we're talking about growth. And that's what happens when you have a major discovery. And that growth happened from the early stages in the exploration phase till you go through the development phase, when you're constructing, or when you're building the facilities or the FPSOs and everything, and when you're producing. When you're producing oil is pretty much when you are actually selling the oil barrels, and you start getting the country start getting the money from the natural resources. That's the longest phase, the production phase. So that's where it's critical on how the country uses or plans that growth and that influx of money. So growth is here a key word. So I like to summarize the social consequences in 6, and I think that those can be negative and positive depending on how you see it. But definitely, the one that always comes to my mind immediately is the resource cost, and of course that's a negative, because at the end is you are making a country or a nation becomes so dependent on their natural resources, the resource that the country has been endowed, and it creates a dependency of the industry, of the people, to just this industry. And that's what happened with oil and gas. I'm going to bring a lot of examples, and probably the example that comes immediately because I lived it is my own country, Venezuela. And Venezuela had different phases. I'm not going to go through history, but I remember that early in the 90s, there was a boom oil, and that's what there was a dictatorship by Gomez, and there was the first oil opening, and there was growth, and then agriculture kind of became a second major player in the economy and so on. I mean, cocoa was one of the main products, but then they started producing, and then came another phase where the oil and gas industry was nationalized by a president, and then a few years later or decades later, then there was another oil opening. I remember, because I lived it, the recent oil opening or apertura. Actually, I was a graduate from college, and actually I was one of the beneficiaries of that apertura, because that's where I got my job. And that was the kind of the second opening when they have the Orinoco Belt. So, but we had a history in focusing only on the black gold, and the other industries kind of either slowed down or they were stopped. Nobody dedicated to that. Agriculture kind of became not an important industry. So we tend to hear two terms, the Dutch disease and the resource curse. I think they both go along. I'm not an economist, but I understand that simple thing that the Dutch disease, as it happened in the Netherlands, was the resource boom. In that case, was with the tulips. And in countries with oil and gas, the resource boom is the oil and gas. Now, the resource curse is what happened when the nation that was endowed with natural resources develop slower than other nations that has that are also poor. So it's two poor countries, but one develops slower, even though they have natural resources, and there are other poor countries that still develop slow, but no natural resources. So there are two. So in other words, the resource course is really, it doesn't happen overnight, but you can actually, I would say, you can foresee when it's happening. In the countries that are now new producers, or they are starting discovering oil, and they start developing only the oil and gas industry, you know where how that's going to end, and how, or the risk of going into the resource course. I'm going to talk more about that with other consequences, but the next one is expectations. How is that a consequence? Again, I have a lot of experience in that area, because when you are in a country, or you are working in a host country where there are new resources, natural resources, oil and gas, people start thinking, or start realizing, oh, there's a lot of jobs are going to come. You see the IOCs, or international oil and gas companies, are going to come here. That means that we're going to get good jobs. We're going to get more businesses. We're going to see an influx of expats. So people think, in the communities or the individuals think that change is going to affect you directly. And it's not necessarily like that. So first, there's also there is a lack of knowledge about the industry. People don't understand that when you start the oil and gas projects with exploration, that can be for years. It can be for 10 years or more, and you're just really doing seismic, which you don't even see because it's offshore. And then you're also, once you do that, and then comes the drilling exploration, and then you have to work on the permitting. And then let's say you discover oil during the exploration activity, but you need to see if it's commercial and if it's viable for production. So that whole phase can be several years. During that phase, usually the oil and gas companies don't go and settle or open a big office. Sometimes there are new ventures, small offices with 2 or 3 people. Usually they bring expats, and then for supporting services, they contract hire local people, but what they hire through staffing agencies, not directly. So there's a lot of information that the regular people, the communities, don't know. So I say that there's how much you need to learn, and you don't know what you don't know. So addressing expectations, it's very important, and addressing them for each key stakeholders. The governments have certain expectations. That doesn't mean that, okay, you start producing, you're doing seismic, and then immediately you're going to produce, and then what's going to happen with that? No. So there's a lot of learning. That's what the capacity building that needs to happen in a country, not just in the government, but in the civil society, institutions, academia. That needs to happen, and a lot of information needs to be needs to flow in the country. And from my experience, coming from a big operator, sometimes operators need to be careful on how they address those expectations, because the fear is that if they start talking or offering or saying what they're going to do, they might be raising higher expectations. So the job of balancing and addressing expectation have to be really, it's like with very, very delicate, because the reputation of the company also is in place. When governments, and when it's in the middle of elections or campaigns, governments like to use this kind of a lot of promises with that, what they're going to do when the oil and gas company come. So it's very delicate, but a consequence is that you have to manage them, and it's going to be a challenge for that. So to summarize this consequence, it's the challenge of managing and addressing expectations from all the key stakeholders. And might be direct stakeholders and indirect, but you have to understand which one they are. The next consequence is corruption. And you might think that corruption is only what you see in institutions, but I see that it also comes with a mindset. So it's not just the concept of, oh, there's going to be more people who wanted to steal money, but definitely the temptation or the opportunities to do some dubious negotiations, or there is a lot of temptation in people. I mean, you see that there's more money in the country, then people always want more. There's the ambition. So that's not only the corruption that's going to be in the institutions, but also in the people. And I'm a firm believer that you need to really work on people's mindset. And if you create an environment and a culture of honesty, transparency, and anti-corruption, then all the developing countries would be in a different place. But it's when you have a rapid growth and a rapid and influx of money coming from oil, there's more money in the wrong hands. And then you will see how new institutions are created, new regulators, new position titles, new opportunities that are not necessarily opportunities, but are opportunities to get a benefit. And that's why companies, operators have a stringent and a very thorough due diligence process to prevent that kind of thing. And it's not only with suppliers, it's not only with institutions, it's with individuals. Even if you own a company or you're not an entrepreneur or you have family in the government. So those are things that need to be prevented, because the temptation, the ambition, and the corrupt mindset is there, unfortunately. So that's what corruption. Here you see the person and poof, it disappeared. And nobody knows where it is. Going back to the growth mindset, I think this is on this side of the slide. I wanted to highlight the positive, because the same thing as you have a negative mindset of more money, more opportunities to steal or use the money the wrong way, there's also a growth mindset. When people start seeing that technology, infrastructure, people, foreign investment is coming, people start getting excited. I remember, and this is kind of a memory from my childhood, I remember that after school, I used to go to my grandma's house, and I remember for a snack, I used to get an apple, a red apple, but those were imported red apples. So they were amazing. So I was being spoiled because I was getting a red apple imported from the US. And then things change. The economy, fast forward, then eating a red apple was nothing fancy anymore, because we were used to getting things that imported. So we knew that it was no longer a luxury, it was a given. I can have a red apple, I can have Snickers, I can have Milky Way, I can have tennis shoes, I can have everything. So people start being thinking of getting better, improving their lifestyle. And that's I think something that it's totally fair, and it's natural, and it needs to happen. If you grow in an environment or communities have limitations, then you're going to grow thinking that limitations and the minimum is what you're allowed to have or where you're entitled to get. And no, people need to think that you deserve a better lifestyle, better house, better education. So that growth mindset, I think it's what it should be, the opposite of what the corruption mindset should do. So people want to improve, but improve with effort, with education, with knowledge. Next, I think that also comes with a rapid growth because of all the things that I mentioned before. With the growth mindset comes competitiveness. People know that now they have access to better education, better articles, better goods, services, better books, access to education, and then I have the opportunity and I'll take them. But that means that it's not going to be just me, it's going to be the other one and the other one. So now we are being competing, I won't say against each other, but we have now more people that are able to apply for the same jobs, or companies that can bring the same service, or one with a better price, other with probably not that better price, but better delivery, better quality. So in that actually is something that you see when a country is experiencing rapid growth. I've seen it in countries recently in Suriname, where I'm very familiar and I've been pretty much going so many times there, and every time I go there I see that there are more restaurants, and the variety, the service improves because they know that the restaurant next door serves better or serves faster. So that I have seen that growth and that change in the city, in Paramaribo, in the service, in with in restaurants, also with transportation. So that's, I think it's a positive aspect of that. That's one of my dogs. Last but not least, because this is not, I mean, there are so many consequences, positive and negative, but I think those can have different branches and have different roots. But diversification is probably the ones that I think is the most important in my opinion, and it's the opposite of the resource course. And that's something that needs to happen, and it's important that it happens early on, and it comes with the growth mindset. It comes with the addressing expectations. It comes with also with competitiveness, and it's not only the diversification of the industry, of the market, it's the diversification of the people skills. We don't need to graduate thousands of petroleum engineers or mechanical engineers or geologists. We need to have a balance, combination, a balanced group of professionals that that can actually support not just the oil and gas industry, but also the supporting industry. And what I like to call it is the also find the linkages to other industries. For example, you have the oil and gas, and then a direct link is, for example, the mining industry. Both are extractive. One more highly technical, or more risk than other, but at the end is they're similar. They both are going to need transportation. They're both going to need catering, logistics, and they're both going to need accountants, um, uh, accountants or emergency people, a procurement group. They're all going to need the same supporting services, like communications or marketing, and those not only are needed in the oil and gas, but also in the other industry. So the more you grow, the more you graduate people with different skills, then these people are actually going to work in companies where you had a person working in logistic. Well, that person can work in logistic, supporting the oil and gas, or supporting the food industry, or supporting the health industry, and so on. But the key thing here is that needs to start from the beginning, and it doesn't need to be something that, oh, we need to do it to avoid the resource course. No, it has to be kind of part of the DNA of the country, that you need to continue producing or look for opportunities to produce other services or good to support not just the existing or the nation oil and gas industry, but others that eventually will come. An example, for example, is more mining. And then in mining, you can probably develop an industry of manufacturing metals, because you have the critical minerals, so you can create solar panels, or you can create the blades for solar, for windmills. So all those will need the same supporting services, or goods and services, but also people with those skills. So diversification needs to happen in every single aspect. On this line of diversification, I want to show you, these are sets of, I think, 6 slides. And this is a real story. This information, this data comes from the Atlas of Economic Complexity. It's a really interesting tool. It's public. Everybody can look at it. And I tell you, you can get addicted to look at this atlas, because you can see all the countries, and you can see how they change from, I think at the earliest is 1995 till the most recent year is 2021. But this is kind of like a picture of what do countries export. You can also flip it by changing it to imports. But the most important thing that I want you to see here is how they how diversified a country can be. And as I said, Venezuela is a good example of the resource course, and how Venezuela pretty much dedicated, I would say it's more than 66% in oil and gas, and products that come from oil and gas. So I would say 75%. So look at this. And the number, I don't know if you can see it, but here is how much was the income from the export. So it's $20 billion in 1995. In 2000, so 5 years later, That's when actually Chavez won the election. So look at the percentages, at least the 52 and the 25. 5 years later, 2005, 2010, so 2021. So as you can see, if we look from 1995, Venezuela had, of course, was an oil and gas. It was, another oil and gas opening, and a lot of production sharing agreements were signed with different oil and gas companies. Then 5 years later, elections came, and then we started, I would call, the dark ages, because they were really dark. It forced a lot of people to leave their country, including myself. And then 5 years later, Chavez started making some changes, expropriating companies. So by 2007, I think it's when all the oil and gas, international oil and gas, were expropriated. So 10 years later, look, it's almost the only thing that Venezuela was producing was oil and gas, so highly dependent on oil and gas. So really, there was no growth in the other sectors. Now, recently, this is the most recent, not much, but it looks like Venezuela is going back to producing other industry, because in a way they need to survive and they need to revive other industries. But to show you an example, what does a diversified country look like? Look at these examples. And I put on purpose countries that are not the Norways, US, but countries that, in a way, they also produce oil. If you see, the brown color is the oil and gas. So some of them are big producers. Brazil and Lithuania a little bit, and Thailand. But they actually work in with other industries and to diversify their industries. So if one of those countries, I would be very curious to see how do a country like Mexico, like Guyana in few years, like Suriname, or like Nigeria, or Namibia, which are going to be new producers, Vietnam, all those new producers countries that are right now experiencing that growth and already feeling some of those consequences. I wonder how would that look like? The picture would look like. So this is really interesting. And so the theory of economic growth, pretty much one is important, relies on the diversification. So the more colors you have, then the more diversify your economy. But how difficult it is to get there. So this is not an economic class. I'm not an economist, but I learned a lot about this, and now trying to understand the message that I want to convey when I work with countries or new producers countries is that the story is there. This is a real story, and there are other stories. But what the most important is that we need to be aware of these social consequences and start early on in the process. And it's not just a one-time initiative or project or plan or policy. It has to be a recurrent, and it has to have a monitoring process, and you need to get feedback and do it again, over communicate, especially for the expectations, and teach people, what does the resource course look like? Are we getting into that? How can we grow people's mindset? And academia has a big, very important role in that. So I haven't mentioned local content, which is kind of what summarizes my job and what I do. But really, local content is one of the strategies that countries can use, new producer or nation oil and gas industries can use to leverage some of these things. But you have to be careful, because sometimes those local content requirements or local content policies can do the opposite and can hinder or slow or even stop foreign investment, and we don't want that. But also, it's important to pay attention to the whole environment and what's been happening. Of course, geopolitics now is another element or variable that might impact all those social consequences. But that it's really, or COVID, we didn't have control over that, but actually it had an impact. So with that, I like to close with a quote from Professor Ricardo Hausmann. I'm very honored to call him my professor because I took several classes with him. He is Venezuelan. He's a former Ministry of Planning, and very smart, but very charismatic in the sense that he explains a lot of these theories of economic complexity and how prosperity works in different countries in a very eloquent way. So he said that economic complexity is like a game of Scrabble. The more letters you have, the more words you can make. The more capabilities a country has, the more diverse products it can generate. So that's kind of all the colors that you saw on those graphs. So I think that's where oil and gas countries, oil and gas producers, and nation oil and gas industry can make a difference and can promote, can encourage that economic growth. They just need to, we need to just have the right tools, the right people, and give these people access to education to get the knowledge, and then the social consequences we can turn into positive social consequences. So with that, thank you very much, and I pass it on to our moderator.
Hey, Leona, thank you so much for your talk. I think you're bringing us a very insightful analysis of the nascent oil and gas industry. Amanda, can you please take the presentation? Maybe we can see each other a little bit better. Sorry. So yes, so we're talking about developing countries, right? So we're talking about mainly populations that have a considerable portion of poor and vulnerable people. So the oil and gas industry, of course, is good news because it brings jobs, like you said yourself. It brings technology. It brings access to infrastructure, to better education, to new opportunities, to more freedom. When we won aside Merchant Sen, the Nobel Prize, like development is bringing freedom to people. So oil and gas industry can bring freedom to people. So that's a good thing. But as you pointed out, you also have downturns that should be looked after. And you mentioned some of them. Of course, there's the presence of the company, then that goes from the having exclusive investments on the oil and gas and no investment in other areas. But there are other issues as well. You mentioned more vehicles, more dust, more noise, maybe some accidents. When we think about construction, we have to construct something. Usually we have male workers. So we have a lot of immigrants coming and people can come from outside and male workers. Then we can have prostitution rates going up. And then we can have violence rates going up. And we can have human rights violations such as child and adolescent sexual use of exploitation of children. So there are some things that I think maybe oil industry has to look for when coming to a new territory, when coming to a new country. But I think that the most tricky one really is the expectation, and you mentioned that because it's inevitable. Like everybody's going to have high expectation of a new discovery, of a new development. So I'd like to hear maybe from you and Nick, what could oil companies do in order to manage that expectation and maybe bring new information? You said yourself, people sometimes don't have knowledge about the oil industry. Sometimes they think that you're going to drill a well and then the oil is just going to spill all over and there's money coming in. So that's not a way it's going to work. Can you please, both of you, if you could comment on that expectation management?
Sure. As I said, that was one of the aspects that I had a lot of experience in, and that's where I gave the importance of that it has right now, because it can be managed, it can be addressed, and the earlier the better. And if companies or people understand who are the stakeholders, then you can address those expectations individually. And I'm not saying person by person, but I think you can group them. And if you have expectations in the communities, then go and have not public consultations or yeah, but have workshops, have presentations, visit the communities, and then sometimes, I mean, just have even the communities, just the women, just the mothers, and then just the men, or so, because everyone have their own expectations, so not everybody's the same. Same with the government. The government, yes, signs the contracts with the IOCs, but there are expectations. Not everybody understand, and not everyone negotiated the terms and conditions of that contract. So there are other people in the government, in other ministries of education, of infrastructure, that don't know what those clauses are and what are the terms and conditions. So they expect things from the IOCs, from the operators, that are not part of that contract, or that are not they don't take place in that. And then the people, I remember being in one country that one of the key person in the government said, we don't know how to handle the people. We have thousands of people dropping their resumes here and sending their brochures about expecting jobs from this big operator that is here, and nobody's calling them. And that doesn't happen like that. And so, but again, you don't know what you don't know, so you need to understand what are the typical things. And it's not that there is a library or a database of frequently asked questions, but you know what people are asking to themselves or to other people. Nick, I'm going to leave you the community,
Okay.
because the communities is very, very interesting.
It is, Priscilla, and it's a great question. Managing expectations, because I was working in Iraq back in 2012 when it's not a new industry there, but it was reappearing. And there was a newspaper article in Arabic stating that the oil and gas industry was going to create 30 to 40,000 jobs in Basra. But the oil industry doesn't create these number of jobs. Of course, it was attributed to an anonymous oil executive. And the next day, every single operator in southern Iraq had hundreds and hundreds of people outside their offices looking for jobs. So when that expectations goes wrong or are mismanaged, it causes a huge problem. The good news is that we are a predictable industry. We know what the problems we create for communities, for societies are around the world. And it's the same problems from North America to South America to Asia and some of these less developed economies. How these problems manifest themselves are different, which means the solutions have to be local. But we know what these communities are expecting. We know the problems we can create. We also have these regulatory processes which are maturing now, even in these nascent industries, where you have to do your environmental and social impact assessments, which identify what people are expecting, what we think the impacts are going to be, the direct impacts, the cumulative impacts. The trick is, how do we act upon this information? How do we make sure that when we've prepared this 5,000-page report, the engineers who are making critical decisions through project design actually consider those, that information, when those decisions are made, go out to the communities. And again, we're beginning to see operators using these different tools to communicate to different stakeholders. Used to be, a sustainability report, plonk that out there. But actually, that doesn't work for a lot of people. Those communities, those people living on the fence line, living right next door to your facility, they need a different relationship to the whole country. And we're getting smarter. We're breaking down those silos between social performance, local content, and communications, and understanding, actually, we've done this before. Let's apply this in a different way to manage expectations. And I think Uganda, actually, Total in Uganda is a great way of how in a nascent oil and gas industry, they're engaging, because, some of their stakeholders have very low literacy rates. So how do you engage? You can't send out posters and flyers. So they're working multiple channels to get this information. And I think that's something we should be proud of, that we've actually learned our lessons and we are better at it. And I could go on, but I'm going to stop there and wait for the next question.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to add is it's how also critical it is to understanding all the key stakeholders and how much information do you give and when. And as I said, I mean, if for those that are familiar with the oil and gas industry, you know what are the phases, and we probably have an idea of how what an average duration of each phase. There are countries like Guyana, for example, that they're experiencing. They have like the development phase kind of it's overlapping, so they're going to be like several years in development phase because they are from one project to another, and then the production phase is going to be really really long. But there are others that it just one well and it just happened at the pace that it happens. There are countries that only have one or two operators in several blocks. There are other countries that have many operators, more than 10 operators, few blocks, and few discoveries. So it's really all the combinations are possible, but I think the consequences could be the same in how we address them, how we approach them, has to be from the perspective of understanding if there is a problem or there's a challenge, especially an economic growth challenge, that we approach them through, I mean, understand what the problem is and not really what the solution can be. And that's a mistake that we all do, but it's a common nature, but we tend to focus on the solution, thinking rapidly on the solution and not understanding the real problem.
Yes, Eliana, I totally agree with you. I think maybe the first step would be to know who the community is. Who are those people? What do they think? How do they live? Why are they expecting? What do you expect? What's their religion? What are their holidays? And things like that. And maybe you can start, putting yourself in their shoes and maybe understanding what they are really expecting from the company, be it an oil company or whichever projects going on. So yeah, I think that stakeholder engagement goes through understanding the stakeholder in the first place. I don't know if Pierre he wants to comment as well. Or
I think
Amanda.
we can talk about expectations for the entire evening. No, so I had that on my notebook also to bring up for again additional considerations. They're different agents in that development. So of course they're an economic agent, the companies who come with a mandate. There's obviously the political elected or the regulatory environment in a country, and to a degree they kind of have slightly different agendas and objectives. So if you can find a happy medium, great. If you don't, then what happens to an oil and gas company? If you're unhappy about how a company is managing social justice or distribution of wealth, what can you do? I mean, in practical terms. So yeah, how do you manage that dilemma for an investor in a country if you're unhappy about how the wealth is redistributed and how the development may not be always sustainable? Because if you're a big company, your shareholders are going to tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's people, communities especially, don't realize how easy it is to influence an oil and gas company. I mean, operating in Colombia, regularly a community, a village will put a rope across an access road to a well site, and that shuts our operations down. We're not willing to physically go and stop it. So people have a lot of influence and they don't realize it. But again, which makes it more important to engage regularly and actually understand what the underlying frustrations, complaints, expectations are, so that you can manage those proactively, because it is very easy to
But
shut our operations down.
Isn't it like a triangle game, Nick, between civil society, the politicians, and economic agents? Because if communities do that, it's probably because they're unhappy about the social justice aspect, but they can't reach their elected politicians or the regulator to change the situation. That's why they go to the oil and gas companies, right?
True. I mean, I always go back, and if they're unhappy in Alberta, we'll get a letter from the regulator. In Iraq, go back to Iraq. I remember one oil and gas company got a rocket through its guardhouse. Again, how the problems manifest itself are always different, but it goes back to what are the root causes, and that engagement piece. People want to be listened to. So if we're effectively engaging, we can block a lot of these problems. When you get a political agenda, that's when it gets very tricky.
But if you're an economic agent investing in a country, it's also I imagine it must be very difficult to influence the expectations of the local populations, because this is borderline politics. You're bringing or evoking a potential future which is not necessarily the one the politicians want to have for that population, right?
Yeah.
So it's a fine line. Yeah.
There's also an aspect, and I would say technology in this case, because I remember, I mean, right now we all have access to a phone, and we have apps like Snapchat, all this, and former Twitter, and all. So information travels really fast right now. But even before, I remember when I was in Venezuela, and the communities actually were blocking the entrance of the production facility in the interior of the country, and we found out when after then, and people were calling the phone. But even before that, you don't know what happens. So the risks right now are bigger, are higher, and they're more expensive, and they're more the probability of happening, they're higher. I don't remember who was the source, but it was one of those big consulting firms, and they did a study, and I remember the percentage was really high, probably more than 70%. But the probability of a oil and gas project being stopped, or being put on hold, or stop because of a community a community event, a blockage of the road, it's highly probable than getting an accident, or getting a delay in an equipment. So the power that the communities have, it's big, but it's sometimes underestimated, because I think that you can manipulate people that are ignorant, that don't have education, and really that's their land, and they know more than they have more access to influence that. So I think it's people have to the work in that area. Public affairs, or the people that work with the communities, from operators and also suppliers, need to be very, I would say, very careful is not the word, but they have to be aware of the sensitivities and understand what they will have, because these are probably the most risky stakeholders that you might have, and information travels so fast, and those can be the most expensive incidents that you can have.
I have a question too. It's about Venezuela too. You comment a lot about Venezuela. We know that a new government came in. So do you think the situation there will improve, or if it could ever improve someday, and the people who live there can have a better life? Or you think this will take a lot of time?
This is really my personal opinion, and it's a personal opinion more as a Venezuelan than a professional that I have seen different cases. The situation of my country is very sad, but I think that we all carve the hole for our own casket, from our own death, because of we all, and I'm including myself, we all have a stake, a responsibility with all the social consequences that I mentioned, that the negative, we all kind of push the country to the resource, because we all only focus on oil and gas. Why? Because that was the industry that have more money. We all went to get jobs in oil and gas because those were the higher pay salaries. So in that way, we didn't really worry about diversifying the economy. Look what's happening right now. We didn't have that growth mindset. I think we had a mediocre mindset, mindset that we think that the government would give us everything, until the day gas in Venezuela, I mean, for your car is the cheapest, and that's, I can't believe it. The government, nobody touches the price of gasoline, because you're going to have a coup d'etat or something like that. So unless the mindset change, and unless there is people that want to actually work hard and give up all the paternalistic, or give the easy money and the corruption, everything, I think a new generation needs to be born, because I think the last 2-3 generations have been born under Chavism. That's a mentality. And for those that didn't know Venezuela before those times, you don't know what Venezuela used to be. And I haven't been able to go to my country for more than 10 years. And last time I was there, I just couldn't believe. So that's why when I tell other countries, look what happened in my country, because it can happen. People were saying, oh, no, we're not going to, no, you're going to end up like Cuba, like with people getting the soaps and that. I'm still sending my dad boxes with soap and like goods from like basic necessity, and it was like a Cuba. So it can happen and it can be avoided, and but I think it starts with the mindset, and that's what we need to learn from the mistakes from other countries.
Okay.
Yeah, it's that's something to really think about, right? We can't forget that case. I would like to go back to the government issue that Pierre touched briefly. I mean, you saw mentioned corruption and things like that briefly. So there is so much an oil company can do, but the industry is bound by policies, by legislation, and by the role of the private sector versus the government. So my question to you and Nick is, how much can an oil company go to fix all those social problems, and how much is really government role?
Nick, I'll let you.
Oh, well, I mean, the first thing is, yeah, we are not government. And it's a very dangerous path to take ownership of the development of these infrastructures and these services, because eventually we will leave, which will leave the country. What we want to do is create an enduring legacy, a stronger country than when we arrived here. And if we start substituting ourselves for government, we're not going to end up with that product. So what is critical here is partnerships. I can't give you a direct answer, because what that looks like, what our role looks like in every context will be different. But we have to have the confidence to go into partnerships with civil society, with governments, these tripartite partnerships, to agree, what we should be supporting. We need to look at what our interests are, what our capacities are, what our competencies are, and what are the needs of the community and the country. And that sweet spot in the middle is where we need to focus. But again, we do not want to take over the role of government.
I will add on what Nick was saying, and it's like I think it's kind of like a triangle, or if you have like a three-leg stool, like my good old friend Bruce Hayes would say. It's a three-leg, and you need those three legs. It's one is the operators or the industry. That needs to happen. It's a role, and it has its responsibility. Then you have another leg, which is the government, which they have a role and a responsibility, but also civil society and all the other stakeholders or institutions that also support this, they also have a role and a responsibility. So the problem has been that everybody thinks that it's a government responsibility to set up the guidelines, to set up the terms and conditions and the policy and the regulation, and then they think that it's the role of the oil and gas to generate jobs and to make the market more competitive, the suppliers more contracts, and they're responsible of everything. So, and nobody kind of aligns their roles and responsibility and their objectives. And so when Nick said it, there has to have a combination in everybody have to kind of put the same weight, and that's why you call the share value creation. That's what we all need to do. The problem is when one leg is longer than the other, or when one is shorter than the other, then you are not going to be able to see it. And that's the position of a country. You want to have stability, but that stability should be brought by all those three legs. Now, there have to be, I believe that there has to be some guidelines, a framework on how to operate, on how to follow kind of some sort of rules, because otherwise everybody's going to be, there have to be a traffic light, there have to be and I don't see it as a police, but there have to be a director in the orchestra to lead all the efforts. And people like to think that this is, it's called policy. A policy is a framework, it's a roadmap, it's some guidelines, but people like to make it immediately as a regulation, a legislation, and sometimes countries are not ready to do that. So I like to use the example, and I should have put a slide of that, because I'm very visual and I like to explain things by example. But in an oil and gas industry, in a nation oil and gas industry, everything is like, you start from exploration to production, everything has to go in phases and at their own pace. And it's like a baby is born, and that baby first learn how to put their neck up and stuff, then how to sit, then how to crawl, then stands up, and there. So same thing, you cannot pretend or expect that a baby will run a marathon when it's only 10 months old, not even at 5. They need to develop their muscles, the coordination, hand-eye coordination, all the things. So the same thing happens with the country. And in terms of the policy and that framework, legislation, you cannot go straight ahead with that because the country is not ready. So that's why you need to allow enough time to the country to evolve. Otherwise, you're gonna have to make amendments or changes, and really, governments don't like to do that, because that's admitting that they did it wrong from the very beginning. And it's okay to make mistakes, but you have to kind of create frameworks. You have to create policies that allow flexibility and allow room for growth. So you're going to have some pants, make them very long, and then you adjust them until you have the right length. Same thing, they have to be adjustable, and they have to actually understand what are the needs of all the stakeholders, and don't not use it as a political campaign, because the country will be the same, it stays there. Politicians come and go, but you have to leave a legacy that the next government can continue. Not that, I'm going to make it better, or I'm going to change it, I'm not going to do it because that's what they did the other ones. No, it's what you're doing for the country, not for your individual interest. And that's the problem of corruption and when things don't work, because you are not thinking about the country, you're thinking about your individual interest as a political party or as a company or that. So it's I can be forever talking about it.
Can I kind of build on that with a practical example? Because you're talking about a lot of non-technical or above ground risks using Shell's language, but their timelines for these risks don't fit into the timelines of the project or the development of the economy. Perfect example would be rural Queensland in Australia 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. We knew from the impact assessments there was going to be a big migration of population to these small towns in rural Queensland. We knew they would bring their kids because there was a policy of no fly in, fly out. And yet the local government didn't have the capital expenditure budget to build the schools where these kids would go because they needed more classrooms. So again, this is an opportunity where we're not taking over education within rural Queensland, but we need to collaborate proactively with the local government to ensure that those classrooms are built and ready for when the workforce, our future workforce arrives and their families. Otherwise, the project isn't going to happen. So this is, anticipating these risks, collaborating partnerships, and helping the government maintain their responsibility, which is critical.
I like that example, Nick. I unfortunately, during my career, I've seen initiatives like that weren't always, very successful. But yes, evoking a successful road or path ahead, I think would be good, especially in a really fast developing countries where you want to know, you would like to know where you want to be in 5 years, 10 years with regards to education, social security, diversification of your economy, etc. How you get there, that's a bit more complicated. But in terms of tools, I'm looking at something you shared with me before the session we're having today, which is kind of a scorecard. So do you think those would have a role to play in making sure nascent industries in countries developing an oil and gas sector quickly, do you think those would be a good tool to monitor progress?
I mean, scorecards are good. I mean, there was an initiative, the Devonshire Initiative in Canada, Devonshire Initiative, Beyond Zero Harm, which actually created a set of social KPIs to measure the well-being, create a baseline of well-being for a community, and monitor it over time, which is something we're pretty bad at. We're not actually, how many different contexts can we say, 50, 60 years later, the lives of the people within that community, that region, have improved because of the presence of the oil and gas industry. We don't have the data in many places to say that. So scorecards are a great way, and we've got to get more technical, the same way that other parts of the business that we expect to be able to say, yes, we're doing this right, or yes, we are on a path of continuous improvement. Why do we make it so kind of, let's tell a story. Let's make a nice promotional video, hard data. We're engineers. We should be expecting data and scorecards to actually help us demonstrate that we are doing it right. And I kind of went off on a tangent there. That's my mission.
So hot areas at the moment for fast growth and potential impact in the years to come. Any comment? Uganda, you mentioned that the area around Brazil is going to probably be very dynamic, so potentially a fast change. Guyana, Suriname, even equatorial margin in Brazil.
Can you guys comment on your views on the equatorial margin development in Brazil regarding the social aspect?
Sorry, I lost my thread there with a 9-year-old boy coming in to demand it. But apologies.
I'm not very familiar with the equatorial margin development to kind of put a statement on that. But two things that I would like to probably communicate or share is that usually we think that you have Brazil, and then you have on the other side of the Atlantic, you have Africa. And even though those two parts of the continent share a lot of similarities in terms of the geology and, the geography, and of course the resources, which it's not surprising. these countries are experiencing the same challenges, but not the way they need to be addressed, or the way to approach those challenges should not be the same, because you need to understand the culture, the people, the needs, the expectations, and everything. So an example that I want to bring is that you cannot, or is not really a solution to use local content legislations from other countries, from this side of the world to the other side. It's not local content, or sometimes policies are not a cookie cutter. Policies are framework, are guidelines, but they have to be developed, drafted, and implemented based on the needs of the country, and to have clear objectives of what you want to try to do. If the ultimate objective is economic growth and prosperity, then they should target those aspects. So I think it would be important to kind of, even though lessons learned are useful, and we're working in one region can work for the other one, it's just for the lessons learned, but not exactly as cookie cutters. So Nick, do you have something?
Well, I mean, I said this earlier, that the problems the oil and gas, the energy industry cause around the world are the same everywhere, but how they manifest themselves are different, and the problems and the solutions have to be local. We need to engage with all our stakeholders, and we need to listen respectfully. And if we can build that trust, we can do it well. And there are great examples, of how we have been a positive force in many parts of the world, and how we can leave an enduring legacy. And I believe, we can be a force for good if we are committed to it and we listen.
And I think if we're prepared to engage at various levels, Nick, also,
Yeah.
because representatives of the people in any legislation might not be the representatives for a specific community close to development. So it is.
We just got to be a little bit braver.
Yeah.
It takes bravery.
All right. Well, on these. Amanda, you never asked your other question, but so I think we've gone over time already. So maybe we conclude with that, and I'll thank you on behalf of SP Brazil for the session today and your participation. Yeah, we could have gone on for. I certainly enjoyed it. So it was an interesting conversation for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it too.
Yeah. Thank you.
And have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have a great week.
Yeah. Thanks, Priscilla. Ileana.
Thank you, Lena, about the presentation. It was very good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Good night.